What's good everyone, my name is Mac and you're watching Make It Easy, and today we're talking about 7 basic woodworking tools. So let's get started. One of the very basic woodworking tools, and in fact a tool that you should have in your arsenal at all times, irrespective of whether you are a woodworker or not, is a power drill. Now a power drill is basically used for either drilling or driving in fasteners like screws. But there's another variant of this which is called an impact driver, which is what this one is, and I'll explain the difference between the two. But the idea is both of these tools come in either a cordless or a corded version, so you can have a battery in here, or you would have a corded version which will basically be connected through a wire. Once you have it powered, a power drill has a chuck, which is what this is. You can have driver bits go in there, and you would be able to drive in either fasteners, or you can also drill holes. The primary function of this thing is to drill holes, and you would see various settings in there. So if you have this particular version, which is a DeWalt version, you will have a drill setting in here, and you have various settings to increase or decrease your torque when you are drilling or driving your fasteners in. So these are sort of variable speed, and the idea is you can drill in holes in wood, or if you're using a different kind of a bit, you can actually drill holes in walls, cinder block, things like that. The use of an impact driver and how it differs from a power drill is the impact driver is primarily for very high torque applications, like when you are driving a screw into a thick piece of wood and it's a larger screw. So now the other difference is you can fit in any of the hex bits in there. So you would basically put it in and then tighten the chuck to tighten your bit, and then you would be able to drive it. But the way an impact driver works is they have this collar. Basically you push in the bit in the collar, and then it is ready to go. But it's a good idea to have both of these in your arsenal when you are starting with any of your home DIY projects, or when you are starting with woodworking. Now another thing that I would want to mention is when you buy something like this, I would recommend buying a drill bit set like this one. It gives you various options. This one in particular is from Ryobi, and the idea is you have all types of bits that you typically need for any of your work in one place. Another sort of tip that I would give is, if you are investing in a power drill and a bit set, see if you can buy the tools as well as the bits from the same company. Now in this case I have a DeWalt one and a Ryobi one, but given a chance, I would have bought both of them, either DeWalt or both of them Ryobi, and the only reason being the batteries. So when you buy a battery for a Ryobi, that won't fit in the DeWalt one, and vice versa. So if you want to expand on your battery set, you would be able to switch your battery packs from one to the other, so that's an advantage. The third piece is invest in a few battery packs as well, because you would need them, and you would quickly realize that when you are doing a lot of work and you're building something, you chew up these batteries pretty quickly, and then you would need a spare pack. So if you have a spare pack, at least one battery pack, you can have one on the tool and the other one on the charging station, and then you quickly swap those out if you need to continue working. All right, the second tool that we want to talk about today is a circular saw. Now when you start your woodworking, you would realize, or even any other projects, DIY projects at home, and if you need to cut wood beyond what you would probably get already cut from a big box store like Home Depot, is that you would need to cut some pieces of wood at home, and then this is one tool that can really help you with that. Now you can use a circular saw to cut wide variety of cuts. If you have long boards that need to be cut in length, you can do that. If you have boards that need to be cut along the grain of the board, so lengthwise, you can do that as well. Now again, there are variants of this. You can get a corded one, which is what I have here, or you can have a cordless one which runs on a battery. Again, to my earlier point, if you are investing in a particular system like a Ryobi or a DeWalt, try to buy from the same company again, because if you have a battery pack which is a DeWalt battery pack, then that most likely would work with your circular saw, and it also would work with your power drill and other tools as well. So that's something to keep in mind. My personal sort of tip there is, when I bought this, I was very new to woodworking and I didn't realize that how quickly this cord comes in the way, especially when you're new to woodworking. It doesn't bother me as much now since I've learned quite a bit, but when you're starting out, it's easier to have a cordless circular saw. But again, cost wise, this is going to be almost half the price of a cordless circular saw. So think about that. If you have the budget to buy a cordless one, I would recommend that. If not, a corded one works just fine. So that's our second tool that you need to have in your woodworking shop. The third tool that we want to talk about today is an orbital sander. Now, if you get into woodworking, you will quickly realize the worst part of woodworking is sanding, and it takes a lot of elbow grease to get things sanded the right way. But if you want that nice, smooth, silky finish, you definitely would want an orbital sander. And the way it works is basically when you plug it in, this thing rotates, and then this is basically your sanding paper that goes onto it, and then you would be able to sand things. There are multiple different types of sanders as well. There are other ones which are belt sander, which is essentially a belt which keeps on rotating on two pulleys, and then essentially you're putting your workpiece against that. But this one is, you would put your workpiece down and you go on top and then sand it. Again, these are also into versions corded or cordless. So if you prefer a cordless one, go with that, but that's going to be expensive as well. Now, one more thing that I wanted to talk about was the grit of these sandpapers. You get these sandpapers in different grits, and the grit would typically be listed on the sandpaper that you buy. So this one is a 220 grit sandpaper, and then this one is a 120 grit. So the lower this number, the more rough it will be, and it will have a higher capacity to take out more material. So if you have a very rough surface that you need to plane, you would use something like an 80 grit or an 100 grit. If you are smoothing things out, and if you are trying to make it more like a glass-like finish, you would probably use the much higher grit. So I typically use 220 grit, 300 grit, or a 400 grit. 400 grit is basically to shine, give the material a shine and smooth it and polish it. I typically buy these in bigger packs because I know I use quite a few sandpapers on every project, but essentially this is how a sandpaper would look like. So if you want to have that professional look for any of your work products that you're creating, you definitely need a sander, and that's our third tool that you need to have. Now, the next two tools or tool groups that I want to talk about are not really tools but accessories, but I think they are very important to have if you want to do any DIY projects at home or you want to do woodworking. The first group is the measuring tape and a speed square. Now, the measuring tape, as you all know, is what you would use to measure, right? So nothing special about it, but the idea is you need to invest in a good tape. I've seen a lot of tapes which are wobbly up at the front here, and not a good quality scale. So look for one which is great quality and you are comfortable using. Some other things that may be helpful, like in this one, you have a stop block sort of, right, where you can stop the tape and you don't have to hold it. There is a quick release as well at the bottom here where you would be able to hold the tape out by pressing that button. So some things to keep in mind. Now this is a speed square. This is really handy in measuring and drawing straight lines. I'm a novice, so I don't use a lot of features which are provided by a speed square, which is for measuring angles and measuring distances, across the length. What I do use this for is drawing straight lines perpendicular to the surface of the wood. So if this was my piece of wood, I would probably keep it here and then draw a line like this, which is why this is really, really handy. So that's the first group, and then you have the clamps. Now, if you're cutting things, especially wood, you're also joining them, and if it is wood, you'll probably join them using wood glue. Clamps are really, really useful if you are joining anything, and there are different types of clamps. This one is sort of a bar clamp. Then there is this is just a scissor clamp. And then you have other ones. There's a pipe clamp, there's a trigger clamp, so bunch of other ones that you would need. You cannot have enough clamps. In gluing applications, you would always need a lot of clamps, and especially if you're putting together a long table, for example, or even for cutting boards, you would need these clamps. So two critical pieces of tools that you need, the tape measure and the speed square, and then the clamps. The next tool that we want to talk about is a Shop-Vac. Now, why a Shop-Vac? If you're doing DIY work and if you're doing woodworking, you will definitely make a lot of mess, especially if you're using a circular saw or any other type of saw to cut wood. The Shop-Vac comes in handy to clean all your mess. It's different from a regular house vacuum that you would use because one, it does not have as many filters. The idea is to pick up as much sawdust and other things that you would drop and get them out of the way. But in this case, so like this particular one, I use it two ways. If you plug in the hose on this side, on one side, it'll act as a vacuum. If you plug in on the other side here, it'll act as a blower. So I use this side for cleaning mostly, and this side for picking up things and vacuuming things. Shop-Vac is a must. It's easy to use. You don't have to lug around your home vac everywhere, and you don't want to mess up an expensive home vacuum for things that you're doing in your garage, for things that you're doing for DIY. If I remember correctly, shop vacuums are in the range of about 30 to 40 bucks for cheaper ones like this one. You can get expensive ones too, but I don't think you need to start with an expensive shop vacuum when you're starting DIY. Get a cheaper one. It'll definitely make your life much easier when you are trying to clean up after you have completed your DIY work. So, Shop-Vac. The last tool that we want to talk about today is Mitre Saw or a chop saw. Now, this is definitely an investment if you're starting, and if you think that DIY and woodworking is something that you definitely want to do, then you would need to invest in a chop saw or a Mitre saw. I started with talking about circular saw earlier, so circular saw is definitely great when you're making cuts, but if you have to make repeated cuts quickly on pieces of lumber that don't need to be cut lengthwise right along the grain, but need to be cut into smaller pieces, then you would need a chop saw. And the way a chop saw works is you basically put a piece of wood here, and then you bring down this blade, which will be able to cut it. So you can see how easy it is. If you have to cut a lot of pieces of either similar size or even varied lengths, you can cut it pretty quickly. Again, chop saws come in different variations. There are chop saws that are smaller length with a small blade. This one I think is a 12-inch blade. There are other ones which are 7.5 inch. You can start with that, a smaller Mitre saw. And then this is a very handy tool if you are doing baseboards, if you are doing crown molding, cabinet molding, things like that, because at that time you need to join them at a 45-degree angle. And what this tool lets you do is you can cut by changing the angle, and you would be able to cut it in multiple lengths. So for example, if I had to cut it in 45 degrees, I'll be able to move it like this, and then cut it like that. So the tool, this is a very versatile tool, definitely expensive, so it's definitely investment. I would say start with a circular saw. If you feel that you have mastered the circular saw and you are being limited by what the circular saw can do, especially if you're doing a lot of DIY, a lot of cutting, then think about a chop saw or a miter saw. So there you have it, your 7 basic tools that you need to have to start your DIY work at home. And hope this was helpful. Let me know if you have any comments in the comments below. In the next video, what we will do is we will use these basic woodworking tools and build a small project. Keep watching, and till the next time, take it easy.